And then we have Dr. Mann. We have the best of us, the greatest of the explorer, the leader of the program, the guy who put everything together, the greatest mind of the century, who is, of course, played by Matt Damon. He's out on some far-flung planet. So what do we see from him in the face of this intractable forces, in the face of despair?
Yeah, Dr. Mann takes and this is something that we see in this movie. We see these contrasted versions of similar stories. And this is where we can talk about technology. This is where we can talk about how you approach something determines the types of solutions that can come out of it. The same type of inputs can result in different outputs depending on how we approach it, essentially. So Dr. Mann sees this intractable force. He tells them that. He's like, yeah, I knew all along that he'd already solved the gravity equation and that plan B was the only plan. But eventually, that mindset that Dr. Brand kind of instills in him of just be quiet and do what we have to do. You'll be the bad guy. It's fine, but we'll keep humans going. I'm willing to take the moral plunge so that humans can keep going. That mindset seems to almost take hold in Mann and evolve to the point where Mann has become so prideful. Stop me if you've heard Mann becomes prideful before. And can't let his own life go. He has inextricably tied himself to the future of humanity instead of being able to separate himself from the future of humanity, which is what Cooper and Murph do.
Right. Yeah, and so we see... So Cooper has already had to make the one sacrifice, right? He already had to leave his daughter behind. He already had to leave his family behind to be able to go do this thing, right? So he's already investing in the future of humanity at some personal expense. And then we see, the Dr. Mann character calls them to his barren planet, even though there's no way that they could possibly, colonize it, just because he wants to talk to some humans and get off the planet, right? He's incredibly lonely and incredibly selfish. So that's his first moment of kind of his character sort of comes to the surface, and we have a hand-to-hand combat on the barren planet. And he takes off and tries to get back to their ship so that he can save at least himself and go do the mission himself. Right? He's still paying lip service to the bigger mission, but he's not willing to give up his own aspirations. And so then we get this again wonderfully symmetrical series of scenes about how the Dr. Mann character tries to solve his problem, and then how Cooper is forced to survive the aftermath. So talk us through this, Drew, because I know this is something I think we kind of gets to the real heart of several of the elements we've been talked about in this movie.
All right, so this is winding our way up to the mountaintop. We like to talk about going on a wonder tour as a journey. We're going on a journey. We're going on a hike. Maybe we've been on this hike before, but we're going to find something new. Maybe this is a new hike for us. Maybe we're going on this hike with new friends. More to come on that in the future. But when we go on these hikes, there's always something to see on the hike. And for us, it's the mountaintop. And for me, the mountaintop in all of Interstellar is the docking procedure scene with Dr. Mann, followed by Cooper's docking procedure scene. So if you're an old Wonder Tour fan, you'll know that we've talked about this scene before in an episode about Interstellar in our Curious Explorers series in our audio only format. But we bring it up in a different light here. So this scene where Dr. Mann is essentially in his hubris, trying to escape, trying to manually do a thing that he should not be able to do, which is dock his lander with this overall spaceship. It's a thing that we see at the beginning of the movie. Again, these paralleled moments. We see Doyle sweating as he's trying to perform the docking procedure there. So we know it's a hard thing to do, obviously, because if you don't get it perfectly right, if there's any expanse in between the two materials, you're going to create you're going to explode it or whatever, right? I'm not an astrophysicist, so. But he goes in there and they're trying to tell him over the comms, man, don't do this. If you fail, you're going to doom humanity. And Mann, in his hubris, turns off the audio and just keeps going and just keeps thinking no, I'm the guy who's going to save it. I always was the guy who was going to save us. That's why they came to save me. He has this himself at the center of the universe mindset that is always the problem for humans. And what does he do? He blows out the whole side of the ship, basically. And the ship goes careening off towards the planet. I mean, Brian, this is like a total, like, devastating moment. You've made it through so much. If you're Cooper and Amelia at this point, you just lose Rom down on the planet. You're chasing Mann, who you thought had this suitable planet for you, and then he blows up part of the spaceship.
So he's totally betrayed them, and so now they are in this debris field, and their one link to both succeeding as a mission and personally surviving is like falling into the planet, and they have not a lot of options, right? So again, we see Cooper go into like, okay, well, there's only one possible thing to do mode, so we're going to go do the thing, right? And so they have this very dramatic cinematic sequence where they're adjusting the spin of their spaceship to match the spin of the other spaceship, and then trying to dock it in the middle of all this chaos so that they can then pull it out in time. But we see a couple of the elements we talked about, right? We've got this moment of decision. We've got this moment of, of like, we're just going to have to go do the thing. And we've got also the Cooper giving up personal control, right? Like not having the idea that he's going to be able to do it. He's got to trust the technology. He ends up using TARS to fly the ship. Like, you're going to have to do it for us. I'll tell you what my goal is. You're going to do the super fast processing calculations to like make it happen. So, and then we get Drew's favorite line, right, out of the whole sequence. What does TARS say? What's his complaint?
TARS is like, that's not possible. Like, we can't do that.
Right.
And Cooper turns around and he's like, no, that's the only option.
We
are doing that.
Right? Exactly. Yes, it may not be possible, but it's necessary. So we're doing it. Right. So we've got the human machine leveraging, right? He's using machines for the things that they're good at. He's using, his own, like, this is the only possible path, so we're going to try it, even though it's a threading the needle situation. But we've also got, in classic cinematic style, we're being shown that they had a kind of a purity of purpose, right? Their intention is not for just themselves, right? Their intention all along has been trying to maximize the big picture, trying to make the humanity's survival as much as possible. Whereas you said, Dr. Mann was all centered around himself, like, humanity should only survive if I get to do it, right? And that's clearly not one of the leadership lessons we want to talk about.
This is something that we've taken away from so many movies, Brian, is sacrifice is critical to growth for humans. And the thing that we sacrifice will determine the direction that we grow. If we're willing to sacrifice from our own, if we're willing to sacrifice things that we have to pay for emotionally or cognitively or physically, then generally the results can be positive on the world if it's done with the right approach. But if we choose to instead sacrifice things that are easier for us, like Mann sacrificing the other team members in order to be able to escape himself, then humans become the worst version of humanity. And we see the power struggles and the loss of freedom and equality and all of these things all start to ramp up, and it all happens very quickly. So I think one thing that we can take away from this mountaintop scene here, as we see the kind of docking scene failure and the inverted docking scene success, is that what we sacrifice will determine the direction of the result, essentially. We cannot be willing to sacrifice our character. That's the one thing that we say on Wonder Tour. Above all else, sacrificing our character basically ensures that in the long term, things will be worse for us and will be worse for the things around us. And sacrificing character is something that Dr. Mann has clearly made a habit of. And which is also, to me, seems like, and we could have a whole argument about Dr. Brand here, but the more I've watched this film, the more I have concerns with Dr. Brand's character. Because at first you're like, oh, he's well-intentioned. He hid it from them because it was the only way. You're like, but the more you think about it, you're like, did he really hide it from them because it was the only way? Or did he hide it from them because he had a fixed mindset and he thought that was the only way? Did he really give everyone else a fair shake? Or did he just grab for the controls just like Dr. Mann and say, I've got this one, you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that contrasted then, Brian, with what we see on the opposite side coming out of our mountaintop here with the Cooper, taking his rover into Gargantua?
Right. Yeah. So then the following scenes here, we see some, real long shot trial by Cooper, right? Just the same as Murph is sort of opening herself up to the possibility that the universe might have more going on than she understood, and that she's going to have to get through her own emotional hangups and her own kind of preconceived mindset to solve the problem. Cooper's got sort of the same thing where he has a sacrifice moment, and he has a exploring some new element of the universe that he was open to.